Hello and welcome to Just One More Watch. Reassuring for me to know that after 3 years and 400 odd videos, I can still come up with a first for the channel, and it's been a bit of a week of firsts. I reviewed my first Timex, the overhyped but really rather nice Timex Q earlier on in the week. Today is my first encounter with the brand Steinhart. Again, doubly surprising considering how many homage watches, especially Rolex homages, I have reviewed. Not for lack of trying though, I must admit I've sent Steinhart a number of emails in the past without response. Not everybody wants me to look at their watches, I understand that. Especially given my propensity for finding fault in the moans and niggles section. Big shout out therefore to my mate Ashley, who loaned me yet another watch in the form of this Steinhart Ocean GMT. Now it is the slightly older model on the oyster style bracelet rather than the newer Jubilee, but I think it is fairly representative of what one can expect if one buys a Steinhart. Now on paper this watch looks absolutely outstanding. It looks like one of the best value all-round options you can put on your wrist for less than $600 US. But we don't live our lives on paper, do we? So today I'm going to present 5 things I like about the Steinhart Ocean GMT, 5 things I don't like about the Steinhart Ocean GMT. Let's flip the camera and find out what they are. So let's start with a quick look at the Steinhart website. When I said less than $600 US, if you live out with the Eurozone, you're getting your tax back on these, plus a little bit of delivery on top, that comes in less than $550 US. This is the one that I've got to show you today, the Ocean GMT on the old 3-link oyster bracelet. They have done a new one on the Jubilee that's a little bit more expensive. There's also a vintage one, as you can see there, and there are 39mm variants of pretty much all of the above. More on that later. So I'm going to start by taking it out of the box. That's usually a good place to start. Then I'm going to run through dimensions and specifications very quickly before going on to 5 things I like about the Steinhart Ocean GMT and 5 things I don't like about the Steinhart Ocean GMT. I'm not even going to mention the fact that this is an homage, because if that's a problem for you, you probably shouldn't be watching the video. So 42mm in diameter, 12.5mm thick, so not the thickest watch in the world considering it does have a decent sized diameter dimension, 50mm lug tip to lug tip, 22mm lugs, little bit of a taper down to about 19 at the clasp, back up to 22 at the clasp. As you can see, Ashley has used this one. It is a well-loved, well-used example. Sized up for me and for Ashley, 7-inch wrist. This one weighs in at 180 grams, so it certainly has a bit of chunk about it, a bit of heft to this one. Thanks in no small part, I'm sure, to the full stainless steel construction. So stainless steel case, crown, bezel, stainless steel bracelet. We've got solid end links, we have solid links with screw links, and it is a decent, if rather perfunctory, fold over security clasp, proper scissor clasp with a decent number of micro adjustments. Standard finishing is decent throughout, pretty much mimicking the Rolex upon which it is based. You've got a high polished side therefore, brushing on the lugs, brushing on the top of the crown guards, kind of semi-guarded crown here, plenty of grip, and it is a nice little embossed crown with the Steinhart logo on it. Tolerances throughout are quite reasonable, and it has that recessed mid-link of the end link, so even if you do have a slightly smaller than average wrist, at least this one is giving it its best opportunity to fit you comfortably to conform to your wrist. Machining on the bezel is nice and crisp, perfectly pleasant throughout. The bezel on this one is unidirectional dive time rotating 120 click, which is just what you want from a GMT. Meaning that every 1 hour on the GMT bezel is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 clicks. If you want to do 2 hours, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 clicks more. Nothing worse than a GMT watch with a 90 click bezel. You never quite get it to line up. As you can see there, no backplay, no bounce, job's a good one there. Aluminium insert though, I'll talk about that one a little later on. The crystal covering the dial is dead flat sapphire with a bit of anti-reflective undercoating, and as you can see there is a Cyclops hovering above the date window at the 3. Now I must say, if it was my money, I would be going for the Jubilee. I think they're a more comfortable bracelet, and of course, given the current craziness surrounding the GMT Pepsi Master 2, that Jubilee certainly copies a little bit of the look of that. But I'm not going to complain about this one. Nice 3-link oyster, and as you can see there's a little bit of taper. It's those outer links that taper inwards, so the center links stay consistent and the outer links narrow down towards the bracelet clasp, and as I said, proper screw links, which is definitely a treat at the price. Popping a link to show you the screw down stainless steel case back. 300 meters of water resistance, so you get a screw down crown, screw down stainless steel case back, and a kind of reasonable graphic there, a trident warrior and a chariot riding a seahorse, all very kind of ocean, and the usual spec list, Ocean 1, 300 meters water resistance, Swiss automatic movement, stainless steel and sapphire crystal. Now Steinhart are a little bit cagey about the movement in this one. I think depending on supply they either give you an ETA 2893-2 or a Sellita SW330. They're basically clones of each other anyway. Let's pop this one on the time grapher very briefly. And no complaints about this one then, running at +5, +7 seconds per day. Healthy amplitude, 0 beat error at the correct 52-degree lift angle. This one is of course 4 Hz, high beat, 28,800 vibrations per hour, so you get that nice smooth sweep of the second hand. I realise this is somewhat arbitrary, it's one watch on one time grapher in one position, but it fair picks the donkeys from the decent ones, and this to me looks like a decent one. And then there's the Lume. The Lume doesn't really fit into either the 5 things I like or the 5 things I don't like category. It's kind of somewhere in between. Nothing on the bezel obviously, but that's fine. There's no lumed pip on that insert, so that does kind of limit it if you are trying to take this one on a dive and timing a dive with you. But note this, Oris, the GMT hand is loomed. So why would you buy a GMT watch and not have the hand loomed? I didn't quite understand that one when I reviewed the Oris Aquis GMT, so delighted that Steinhart have chosen to loom it. Doesn't last all that long, so it's a kind of neutral point, this one. That's the basics done then. Let's get on to 5 things I like, 5 things I don't like. Starting with the 5 things I like, starting with the price. $550 for this much watch. Oh, that has got to be up there with one of the best value watches, I think, under $1,000 on paper, as I said. All stainless steel GMT diver, 300 meters of water resistance with an ETA 2893 or Sellita 330 in the back of it, sapphire crystal, decent bracelet, solid links, solid end links. $550. Seriously, that is a great deal. Number 2, it's Swiss made. We haven't even talked about that yet. Steinhart are a German-based company, and there are some reasonable rumours that most of this comes from China, but nonetheless it says Swiss made on the dial. It's got a Swiss movement in the back of it, and Swiss made rules being as slippery as they are. If 60% of the cost price of the watch is in Switzerland and it's cased in Switzerland, then you can call it Swiss. Now then, those magic words either side of the index at 6 do mean something to me, and they mean something to most watch people. So Swiss made for $550, this is a hell of a deal. The movement, I've talked about it already. That's point number 3 that I like. Either or, whether you get the ETA or the Sellita doesn't bother me in the slightest, but a GMT Swiss Auto at the price is a stellar deal. One thing I will say though, the ETA 2893s, a lot of them have a consistent fault. They don't really line up. The GMT hand is always a little bit off. If I pull this to the 12 o'clock, that should in theory be lined up with one of the hour indexes, and it is not lined up with the index. If I adjust the GMT hand that way, it never lines up with the hour index. It's always about half an hour off. Consistent complaint. Have a look on the forums. A lot of people are complaining about that same problem. I'm sure it's something you get used to reading, but it's still not ideal. So is that a good thing or a bad thing? Anyway, I'm going to leave the movement as a good thing. 4th thing I like is the quality of the machining overall. It feels like a pretty sturdy watch. All stainless, nice bezel action, solid links, solid end links, decent clasp. It feels like a watch that you could have a very long and very happy relationship with. Which brings me on to point number 5. The sheer practicality of this thing. This really does everything you could want it to in a watch. I know that some people don't like wearing big chunky divers as dress watches or office watches, but other than that, you couldn't ask for much more from your watch than you get from this Steinhart Ocean GMT. It's a hell of a practical package, hell of a well priced. So, as I said, there is an awful lot to like. But what do I not like? Well, let's start with that Cyclops. Come on, Cyclops, you had one job and you stuffed it up. You don't look like you're really bothered. You're not putting in much of an effort, are you? I mean, if you look sideways, you're only magnifying it maybe 0.75 rather than the usual 1.5. Pretty hopeless. I mean, it's nicely aligned, but they could have done with something a little bit more bulbous, a little bit more effective than that, surely. Next up is the bracelet. Now, there is a bit of taper here, 22 down to 19, back up to 22 at the clasp. It does feel slightly over braceleted, this version. I'm sure that perhaps isn't as much of a problem with the Jubilee. Not quite sure what the taper is there, but I would imagine the Jubilee tapers a little bit more dramatically and has a slightly smaller clasp. Maybe if it was down to about 17, back up to 19, it would feel like a smaller watch on wrist, but it doesn't. It feels like a big watch on wrist. So let's get it on wrist. There it is, sitting on top of my 7-inch wrist. No curvature to that case whatsoever. 42mm and 51mm lug tip to lug tip. It feels a little bit big and a little bit clumsy. I've got a 7-inch wrist. If you have a smaller than me, smaller than average 7-inch wrist, I would be steering you towards the 39. Even if you go for big watches, I think this is going to be a bit of a saucer and it's going to flop around in a way that you probably don't want your big heavy 180 gram all stainless steel GMT diver to be flopping around. So my third complaint involves the size. Complaint number 4, the aluminium bezel insert. I know that a similar looking Pepsi dual tone aluminium bezel insert has featured in many Rolex GMTs, costing many times the price of this one, but it makes the watch look a little bit cheap. It reminds me of the one as fitted to the Seiko SKX009, and as much as I love that watch, that is not a compliment. Again, there are ceramic bezel versions of this watch available, and I would be steering you in that direction. I really don't think this bezel insert does the watch any favours overall. It's one area where it's pretty obvious that they've saved a couple of bucks. Fifth and final point, and we're going to go macro for this. Cheap dial and hands. Again, the most important aspect of the watch, the one that you look at to tell the time all the time, and I think they've gone cheap here. Dead flat, uninteresting, super basic handset, and it is a mixture of printed. There's the kind of Steinhart logo printed, Ocean GMT 300 meters, automatic movement, professional. It's got that kind of 4-line, again replicating Rolex, printed below the pinion, above the index at 6. But it's a super flat, dull, grey-black dial itself, and those indices, again in a classic Rolex pattern, the diamond at 12, the big batons at 6 and 9, and the circles everywhere else. They're those kind of semi-applied, they're not properly applied indices, they look like they've been kind of printed on top. There's no great depth to them, and I think that's a part of the problem of this slightly disappointing Lume that I showed you earlier on. It's a bit of a cheap handset, bit of a cheap dial. Combined with the cheap looking bezel insert, it doesn't give the watch overall a particularly luxurious look. But if you've been paying attention, you probably have worked out that most of my complaints about this watch can be bypassed if you pick a different model. I would probably suggest going for the 39mm, which will get rid of the bulkiness and hopefully sort out that taper on the bracelet as well. I would definitely be opting for a ceramic bezel insert because, as I said, that one doesn't look great. And there are a couple of cracking looking retro versions of this watch, which hopefully would alleviate the slightly cheap looking dial and hands. So what does that leave you with? Well, it leaves you with a super practical, super well-spec'd, well-made Swiss watch for less than $600. So if you buy the right one, this could be a cracking addition to your collection. So there you have it, my first encounter with the brand Steinhart. Big shout out again to Ashley for loaning me this one in for review. Hopefully not my last encounter, because I must admit I wasn't blown away by what I saw. Like I said, this one has an awful lot of, in theory, on paper appeal. Great set of specs for not an awful lot of money, but I must admit I was a little bit disappointed by certain elements of it when I got it on wrist. The 42, not my size. I would be really interested to get my hands on a 39. So if you are in Australia and you've got a Steinhart GMT 39, you know where to find me. And I can't help but wish they had spent a little bit more money on the dial and hands. They really do look pretty cheap, even when compared to a watch that's well under $100. So come on, Steinhart, start answering my emails. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video.